Looking for the answer. Miami sun, where I know that bitches love when it rain. My mother's son, but all my cronies keep it a day. Been through the system, but I ain't tryna go through it again. Shooter on parole, and I know that you shoot it again. For the ops and their friends, I'm too real to pretend. All that time in the trap, got me timing.
Good morning, world, and welcome back to What the Happened This Week. My name is East Brave, and welcome to your new home for real news where we cut through the noise with no fluff, no corporate spin, and absolutely zero bull. Every week, we break down the biggest stories in politics, pop culture, world events, and everything in between with sharp insights, raw honesty, and a perspective you won't get anywhere else. Before we get into it, I want to thank you for your support. If you enjoy the content, make sure you like, subscribe, and share the video. It helps the channel grow, and it keeps independent journalism alive. I am an independent journalist, not a corporate newsroom. Everything in today's episode is gathered from publicly available sources, credible outlets, and reputable platform. I do my best to bring you accurate, balanced information, but if you catch anything that needs correction or clarification, feel free to drop it in the comments. All right. That's enough of the intro. Let's not waste any more time. Let's find out what the happened this week. This week, Switzerland continues to mourn the tragic loss of 40 lives in the Constellation Bar fire in Crans, Montana. Families, friends, and communities across the country and beyond have been grieving, and the nations held a day of mourning to honor those who perished. Many of the victims were young, full of life, celebrating the New Year's when the unimaginable happened. We remember them first. Their lives, their story, their youth, and their families. Nothing else comes before that. As the investigation unfolds, Swiss authorities have arrested Jacques Moretti, the co-owner of the bar, on suspicion on manslaughter through negligence. Officials are examining serious lapses in safety procedures, including the lack of inspection, fire precaution that should have been in place. This arrest highlights the accountability side of the tragedy, ensuring the negligence, if proven, is addressed. This tragedy echoes incidents we've covered before, including the 2003 Rhode Island concert fire, where neglected safety measures contributed to the death of over 100 concert goers. I introduced that example in our previous episode, not to claim it's the same, but provide context, to invite reflection of how safety, oversight, and regulation can be ignored, sometimes with devastating results. History shows pattern, and today patterns are worth noticing. The Crans, Montana fire is a stark reminder that tragedy doesn't just happen, sometimes it's preventable. As the detail continues to emerge, we honor the victims, we watch for accountability, and we reflect on the systems designed to protect lives. For tragedy in Switzerland to strategy in the Arctic, let's shift from fire to ice as we look at why Greenland matters more than you think. President Donald Trump has reignited his long-discussed interest in Greenland, a massive autonomous territory of Denmark. He is saying the US might act on Greenland whether they like it or not. But what does that mean, and why is the world watching? Greenland isn't just ice and snow. It's strategically positioned in the Arctic along key military and surveillance routes between North America and Europe. Beneath that frozen surface lie critical minerals and rare earth elements essential for technology and defense. Trump frames his push as a matter of U.S. national security, warning that the rivals like Russia and China could gain influence if the U.S. doesn't step in. His team has floated options ranging from negotiation and purchase to controversially military involvement, though experts say that the latter is highly unrealistic and politically explosive. Greenlandic leaders are united in opposition. All 5 major political parties issued a joint statement, "We don't want to be Americans." Denmark's prime minister has called any attempt to annex Greenland nonsensical. Greenlandic leaders emphasize self-determination, make it clear that the island is not for sale. This isn't just about land. Pressuring Greenland and Denmark could strain NATO, since all 3 are alliance members. The Arctic is already a zone of strategic competition. Any U.S. attempt to exert control could trigger international pushbacks and complicate relations with allies. So here's the bottom line. President Trump is putting Greenland in the spotlight through tough talk, threats, and ambitious ideas. The reality is clear. Greenland and Denmark are firm in opposition, and any unilateral US move would face legal, diplomatic, and geopolitical roadblocks. So, why does this story capture attention? It's about power, resources, and how nations calculate advantage in a changing world. And it is a reminder that political theater can sometimes look like geopolitics, even when the map clearly says otherwise. Here's my take. I don't know if y'all ready for this, but I had a lot of time to think about it. So, first, a key fact is this: Greenland is not a NATO member. It's an autonomous territory of Denmark, which is a NATO member. So while Greenland itself doesn't have a seat at the table, Denmark would back its territory in any security matter. That means NATO consideration exists, but only indirectly through Denmark's obligation. The United States does not need NATO in any way smaller nations do. NATO amplifies US power, but the US military can project force independently. President Trump understands that reality better than most leaders are willing to admit out loud. At the same time, there is an active war on the other side of the world, and a global attention is stretched thin. That matters. Greenland, from purely strategic standpoint, is not a random obsession, it's geography. And geography wins wars long before ideology ever does. Greenland sits at a critical Arctic crossroad between North America and Europe. Control or influence there means early warning, missile defense positioning, naval dominance, and Arctic access as ice routes continue to open. It's surrounded by water, which immediately favors a nation with the most powerful navy on Earth. The United States Navy doesn't need permission to control sea lands, that's already its strength. So when people frame this as reckless or delusional, they're missing the point. You don't have to agree with the approach to recognize the logic. In an era where global conflict is shifting northward towards resources, shipping lanes, and missile trajectories, Greenland is not symbolic, it's strategic real estate. The question isn't whether the US can project power there. The question is how far a nation should go when strategy collides with alliances, sovereignty, and global optics. Speaking of territory and control, we head back home where politics and consumer habits collide in a battle over Canada's favorite whiskey. This week, Ontario Premier Doug Ford made headlines by threatening to pull Crown Royal whiskey from provincial liquor stores. On the surface, it sounds absurd, banning one of Canada's most recognizable brands. But once you look closer, this story isn't about whiskey, it's about jobs, taxes, and unintended consequences. Crown Royal was created in 1939 to commemorate a royal visit to Canada. Over time, it became one of the most successful Canadian whiskey brands in the world. Today, Crown Royal is owned by Diageo, a global spirits giant. The whiskey itself is distilled in Gimli, Manitoba, and that part isn't changing. Manitoba remains the heart of Crown Royal's production, and those jobs are staying put. The controversy centers on Ontario, not Manitoba. Diageo is closing a scaling back bottling and distribution operations in Ontario, shifting some of that work to the United States. So while the product remains Canadian, Ontario loses jobs, and that's why the province is pushing back. The threat to remove Crown Royal from LCBO shelves is a political response to a corporate decision, not a national ban and not a manufacturing shutdown. Ontario uses access to its liquor market as leverage. The message is simple. If you move the jobs out of the province, you will lose shelf space in this province. But here's where it gets interesting. And of course, you're wondering what my take is. So this is my take. If Ontario actually pulls Crown Royal, it won't actually make people stop buying it. It'll just change how they buy it. You don't eliminate demand, you redirect it. You almost certainly will see a, gray and black market emerging. Crown Royal would still make its way into Ontario, but it wouldn't be cheap because scarcity never lowers prices, it raises them. And then there's cultural irony. What kind of legacy does this create when Ontarians start driving to Winnipeg to buy Crown Royal and bring it back? Because that already happens in reverse. Let me tell you guys something, okay? Manitobans regularly drive to Calgary to buy alcohol in bulks because Alberta has one tax structure which makes it cheaper. Same product, different province, one tax decision changes consumer behavior. So if Ontario follows through, history suggests this won't punish the brand, it'll just punish convenience. This isn't about whiskey nationalism. It's about how provinces try to protect jobs using market power and how consumers always find a workaround. Crown Royal will still be Canadian, Manitoba will still distill it, Ontario may just force people to drive farther and pay more to drink it. On January the 7th and 8th, 2026, a federal immigration enforcement operation sparked tragedy, outrage, and national scrutiny in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Portland, Oregon. Over 2 days, federal agents opened fire in two U.S. cities, leaving one woman dead, two others wounded, and entire communities asking the same question once again: who is accountable, who is protected, and who decides when lethal force is justified? On Wednesday, January the 7th, in South Minneapolis, an ICE agent shot and killed 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good, a mother of three, during what federal authorities describe as a targeted enforcement operation. Good had just dropped off her youngest child off at school. Federal official quickly claimed the agent acted in self-defense, alleging that Good's vehicle possessed an imminent threat. But bystander video and eyewitness account tell a different story. Footage shows Good turning away from agents, not driving towards them when shots were fired. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey publicly rejected the federal narrative, calling the self-defense claim garbage and demanding ICE to leave the city. Good's family described her as a compassionate, artistic, and peace-oriented, a poet, writer, and caretaker deeply rooted in her community. Vigils and protests followed almost immediately, as residents mourned her death and demanded accountability. The FBI assumed control of the investigation, barring state and local law enforcement from accessing evidence, a move that drew sharp criticism from city and state officials and intensified calls for an independent review. This shooting did not just happen in a vacuum. Renee Good was killed less than a mile from where George Floyd was murdered in 2020. For a Minneapolis resident, that proximity is not geographic, it's emotional and historical. Both deaths were captured on video, both involved disputed official narratives, both reopen unresolved wounds about law enforcement, power, and accountability. For a city still carrying the weight of George Floyd killing, this felt hauntingly familiar. The streets remember. Just 1 day later, on Thursday, January the 8th, federal agents opened fire again, this time in southeast Portland, Oregon, near the Adventist Health Hospital in Hazelwood neighborhood. According to local police and federal statements, U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents were conducted a targeted vehicle stop when they fired on a vehicle, injured a man and a woman. Both were later found with gunshot wounds and transported to local hospitals. Their conditions were initially not publicly confirmed. Federal official claimed that the driver attempted to weaponize the vehicle against the agents, prompting the shots, a narrative local leaders have questioned and demanded a full investigation into. The FBI has taken over the investigation, and Portland police said that they were not directly involved in the initial shooting. Local leaders, including Portland Mayor Keith Wilson and Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, condemned the shooting and called for a halt to federal immigration operations until transparent inquiry is completed. Back-to-back federal shootings in two cities, 2 days apart, have intensified concerns over aggressive immigration enforcement tactics and the expanding use of force by federal agency operating in local communities. And these aren't the only two incidents. Civil liberty groups note a pattern of force being used over several federal enforcement actions in recent months. Civil rights groups warn these actions put ordinary civilians at risk. Critics argue that when federal agents operate with limited local oversight, accountability narrows while power widens, eroding public trust. Protests erupted across the nation in response to these shootings, with thousands reported in cities from New York to Los Angeles, Minneapolis to Portland. Citizens took to the streets demanding accountability, transparency, and an end to aggressive federal enforcement tactics. In Portland specifically, large nighttime protests formed outside the local ICE facility and an ICE building, where demonstrators called for an end to federal operations, though some disturbances led to several arrests. In the same week as Renee Good's death, the Trump administration froze hundreds of millions of dollars in federal child care funding, including approximately 180 million affecting Minnesota. The freeze disproportionately impacts low income and immigrant families, particularly small American communities, after unverified allegations of fraud at selected daycare centers circulated online. State official and civil rights groups argue the move punishes families and children rather than addressing isolated wrongdoing, and view it as politically motivated. This matters because it mirrors the same pattern we're seeing with these shootings. Freezing essential services, defending lethal force despite contradictory video evidence, doubling down on national media instead of acknowledging uncertainty. In a recent 3-hour interview with the New York Times, Donald Trump repeated claims that Renee Good tried to run over an ICE agent, even as video footage and local officials disputed that account. That gap between official narrative and visible reality is where trust collapses. And look, let's be honest, this doesn't feel accidental. People are genuinely asking, why Minnesota? Like, did somebody tell Trump that there was oil in Minnesota underground or something that we don't know about? Because all these incidents and all these sequence of things happening is wildly crazy. Freeze childcare funding, target immigrant communities, paint an entire Minnesota community as criminal on live television. Then shoot a mother of 3 and call it self-defense, while the video with multiple angles that we all saw tell a different story. At some point, it stops feeling like coincidence and it starts feeling like a stress test. How far can we go? And if we stack these events together, aggressive federal enforcement, lethal force against unarmed civilians, funding freezes that hit immigrant families the hardest, official insisting that the public didn't see what they clearly saw. Right. Because we're morons, right? That's not confusion. That's a test of power. These shootings are not isolated incidents. They reflect a broader pattern, one where authority expands, oversight shrinks, and accountability becomes optional. Trust doesn't erode quietly, it fractures. People feel unprotected, unheard, and governed without their consent or participation. Minnesota has lived this before. Portland is watching it happen again. And across the country, many Americans see federal power growing more distant, more forceful, and less answerable. This is the danger point, not chaos, but alienation. A growing sense that social contract is being written without public consent. History tells us what happens when that fracture deepens. These deaths, these policies, and these rhetoric are not random. They are a pattern. They are a warning. And they are a direct challenge to the idea of trust between the government and the people it serves. And that's our coverage of the story, raising serious questions about power, accountability, and trust. From conflicts and controversy to inspiration, now the spotlight is on a young Emirati teen defying limits and climbing to the top of the world. In the United Arab Emirates, a country where women's rights have grown steadily over the last few decades, where barriers still exist. Young women often face social expectation that prioritize tradition over adventure, career over personal ambition. While women in North America and other parts of the world have long achieved remarkable feats with relative autonomy, Fatima Abdurrahman's journey is extraordinary because one of the cultural and social challenges she navigates in her own context. Fatima is from the United Arab Emirates and is identified as an Emirati, meaning she's a citizen of the UAE and represents the country in her mountaineering achievement. Sources describe her as an Emirati mountaineer, and she's part of the UAE growing adventure sports community. She's also currently a university student studying economics in the UAE, balancing her education with her ambition, climbing goals as she works towards the 7th Summit Challenge. So here is the wild part of the story. At just 18 years old, Fatima became the youngest Arab woman to reach the summit of Mount Vinson, the tallest peak in Antarctica. I don't know about you. When I was 18 years old, I was nowhere near a mountain, I'll tell you that much. Standing at nearly 4,900 meters above sea level, the mountain is one of the most remote and unforgiving places on Earth. It does not care about women's rights or liberation. It does not care for human life, period. The mountain will not hesitate to erase you if you are not resilient, prepared, and relentless. Fatima faced temperatures below -40 Celsius, Fierce winds and absolute isolation, a test of endurance, courage, and sheer willpower. And yet, she persevered, planting her flag at the top and marking a moment that inspires millions around the world. This summit is part of her larger goal to complete the seventh summit, climbing the tallest mountains on every continent, a challenge that pushed the limits of physical and mental resilience. Fatima's story is more than mountaineering glory. It's a testament to women's resilience, showing that courage and determination can thrive even under immense pressure and social constraints. From the deserts of the UAE to the ice peaks of Antarctica, her journey reminds us when women rise, they don't just reach the summit, they survive, endure, and lift us all. And standing there at the top of the world, planting her flag, the view stretches endlessly, vast, untouched, and infinite. It was a glimpse of freedom itself, a horizon unbound by rules or expectations. For a moment, the mountains and the sky became a mirror of what it feels like to be a woman, to claim their own space, their own power, their own journey. A pure, breathtaking, exhilarating sense of liberation. And I say all that to say this: there is beauty in every mess. From heights to the heart of a local community, our next story comes from Winnipeg Beach, where one viral moment sparked a conversation about morals and boundaries. A fight over a bikini? You won't believe where this happened. Winnipeg. A mother at a Winnipeg beach reportedly got upset when another mom allowed her 13-year-old daughter to wear a thong-style bikini around her young 4-year-old son. The confrontation was captured and shared on A&E social media, sparked debate about parenting, public spaces, and personal boundaries. Viewers argued over what's appropriate and what's overreacting. Some say the mom was protecting her child. Others called it an overstep. And here's my take, guys. This incident started off heated, like a harsh winter wind, but both sides eventually found common ground. They walked away feeling they had either won or lost. But what most people see is only the surface. I always try to find the beauty beneath the surface. As Tupac said it best, I look for the beauty before it's ruined. In this moment, the mother son learned about boundaries and morals, while the other mother and her daughter gained insight that what's acceptable in one context isn't always appropriate elsewhere. Two truths can coexist. Both sides can be right and wrong at the same time. But the blessings are always found in the lessons. Stories like this fascinates me. When A&E covers something, it's rarely just entertainment. It's a signal that the moment has cultural weight. This isn't just about a bikini or a beach. It sparks conversation about morals, ethics, and parental responsibility. It reminds us that even in ordinary moments, society negotiates boundaries, values, and the lessons we pass on to the next generation. What's striking is the context that we live in today. Algorithms reward spectacle, outrage, and absurdity at scale. They do not reward nuance, reflection, or integrity. Sadly, that's why a heated confrontation on the beach can reach millions, while the deeper lessons about empathy, dialogue, and understanding often remains invisible to the crowd. So, if you missed it, it's too bad. The story challenges us to look past the surface, to find the subtle beauty and insight beneath the viral chaos. Canada is facing a growing mental health crisis, and a new report shows that work, something most Canadians spend the majority of their waking hours doing, is a major part of the problem. From financial stress to high pressure jobs, mental health struggles are now affecting nearly every corner of society. Consider the numbers: about 1 in 5 Canadians experiences a psychological health problem each year, and mental health issues are now the leading cause of disability in this country. Nearly half of Canadian workers report feeling burnt out, and many don't feel comfortable disclosing mental health struggles to their employers. Financial pressures add to the burden. Young Canadians, particularly Gen Z, reported levels of stress around money, job prospects, and daily life. And study shows that financial worries are significantly impacting their mental health. Work itself is a major stressor. Roughly 47% of working Canadians say work is the most stressful part of their daily lives. And experts warn that difficult working conditions, long hours, and toxic workplace culture are critical contributors to the mental health crisis. Frontline workers face unique challenges. Canadian paramedics and emergency personnel reports high rates of work-related post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, showing that certain jobs carry higher mental health risks and require urgent attention. Canada is not alone in facing mental health pressures, but impact work stress is stark compared to other developed nations. Research indicates that Canadian workers report high levels of burnt out and stress than their counterparts in most European countries, where work-life balance and labor protections are stronger. Poor workplace mental health costs the Canadian economy tens of billions of dollars annually. The issue is not only human, it affects productivity, engagement, and long-term economic growth. Experts point to three main drivers: workplace stress, long hours, financial strain, especially for younger adults. These overlapping factors mean that Canadians are struggling in their workplace, schools, and communities, often without adequate support. The mental health crisis in Canada is no longer a background issue. It is a national concern that touches almost every household and workplace. Addressing it will require changes in workplace culture, stronger support system, and broader social awareness. As Canadians continue to navigate the pressure of modern life, one thing is clear: mental health cannot be ignored, and work must be part of the solution, not the problem. Speaking of policy and pressure, let's cross the globe again. From Canadian workplace to US China trade tensions and the de minimis debate under Trump. De minimis is a Latin term meaning something is too minor to matter. In US trade law, it refers to a threshold for low value imports, packages that are too small to require full customs inspection or tariffs. Essentially, if a package is under a certain value, it could enter the country duty free and with minimum oversight. For decades, this system existed quietly, mostly as practical efficiency measure. Customs officials realized that collecting duties on very small shipment often cost more than the revenue generated, so Congress set a low value exemption. Originally, this threshold was just a few dollars, gradually rising over decades to account for inflation. $1, then $5, then $200 by the 1990s. The goal was simple: speed up trade, reduce paperwork, and focus enforcement on high value imports. For decades, it worked. Imports were mostly gifts, personal items, or traveler shipment. The law was never intended to govern industrial scale global e commerce. Everything changed in the 2000s with the rise of online shopping, global logistics, and mass manufacturing in China. Companies realized that they can sell individual items directly to consumers anywhere around the world profitably. In 2016, the US raised the de minimis threshold from $200 to $800. Again, the intention was efficiency, to speed trade and help consumers. This created an enormous unintended consequences. It became a massive loophole for Chinese e-commerce companies. Companies like Shein, Temu, and AliExpress built entire business models around it. By shipping millions of small packages under $800 directly to US consumers, they could avoid tariffs, custom paperwork, and many inspections. Meanwhile, American retailers importing bulk shipments still faced full tariffs and oversight. The result was asymmetric trade advantage. US companies were undercut, consumers were offered cheap prices, but enforcement agencies were overwhelmed, unable to inspect more than a fraction of the packages. And as volumes exploded, so did the risks. Counterfeit goods, unsafe electronics and cosmetic, forced labor linked products, and even illicit substances like fentanyl came through. By the early 2020, over half of all de minimis packages entering the US came from China, flooding the market in a way that the law never intended. Donald Trump administration moved decisively to end the exemption for China and Hong Kong. Packages from China no longer qualify for de minimis exemption. Tariffs now apply. Customs inspection increase. Chinese companies' cheap direct-to-consumer shipping model are disrupted. The administration justified this action as a matter of fairness, enforcement, and national security. The loophole allowed Chinese companies to undercut American businesses while also creating a channel for dangerous or illegal goods. The consequences are already visible. Some Chinese companies are shifting inventory to US-based warehouses. Customers face higher prices and longer delivery times. Hong Kong postal services even halted certain shipment to the US to avoid tariffs and rejections. For consumer, this may mean fewer ultra-cheap imports by potentially stronger domestic competition. For American businesses, it's an opportunity to compete on a level playing field. Why does this all matter? The de minimis law began as a small, clerical efficiency measure. Over a decade, it involved in a global trade vulnerability. China exploited it, e-commerce scaled it, and enforcement agencies were overwhelmed. Now the Trump administration is closing the loophole, not quietly, but deliberately. This is more than just a small technical change. It represents a shift in global trade policy, a recognition that laws written for the 20th century cannot manage 21st century supply chains. And here's the reality that brings all of this home. Before these changes, the US was flooded with inexpensive import parcel. More than 1 billion small packages entered the country under the de minimis rule in a single year, most from China, up from just over 134 million a decade ago, a surge more than 600%. A lot of what Trump is doing actually makes sense from a business perspective. He understands, markets, margins, and leverage. He wants to make America great again, and he sees a system where Chinese companies were exploiting a loophole, getting rich off American consumers while undercutting domestic producers. Closing that loophole is a step forward. But let's be clear about the deeper issue here. And it's not just tariffs or trade policy. It's how much Americans consume compared with the rest of the world. The United States is the largest consumer economy on the planet. In 2023, American consumer spending totaled almost 19 trillion, dwarfing every other nation's numbers, more than twice China's total consumer spending of roughly 7 trillion. And that's in raw dollars, not adjusted for population size or income differences. Per person, the difference is even sharper. The average American spend more than 45,000 per year on consumption, more than twice that Europeans spend on average. And because of this consumer culture, US household spending makes up nearly 68% of the entire economy, a much higher share than in major competitors like the EU or China. That means the global marketplace, including giant companies elsewhere, depends heavily on American being willing to open their wallets. The world's producers follow US demand, not the other way around. Here's the point most people aren't thinking about. American consumers are not just big spenders. They are disproportionately big spenders compared to other countries. China has more than 4 times the population, yet total consumer spending is still a fraction of the US total. Europeans are hundreds of millions of people strong, yet their spending per person is far lower. So when I say Americans aren't wise consumer, I don't mean stupid. We are the prime market that companies chase after because we are willing to pay, even if cheaper doesn't always mean better, and even if those dollars are enriching foreign companies more than our own. Trump's move doesn't just protect American businesses, it forces the market to play fair. It pushes towards accountability and a healthier trade, even if it means higher prices at checkout. And that is a perspective worth considering in the age of global e-commerce. American consumers' activity drives profit like almost no other nations on earth. And we should rethink not just where we spend, but why we spend at all. Before anyone reacts to the story, there is something we need to do because most people hearing it have never been taught who these people were, where they lived, or what was happening to them at the time. And with that, you're not informed, you're just reacting. The woman at the center of the story belonged to the Yakut, an indigenous people of northeastern Siberia. They migrated north centuries ago and settled along the Lena River basin, adapting to one of the coldest inhabited regions on Earth. This wasn't a primitive society struggling to survive. It was a highly adaptive culture with structured clans, strong oral traditions, horse and cattle breeding in subarctic conditions, and deep and spiritual cosmological systems. They didn't just survive the environment, they mastered it. At the center of the Yakut society was shamanism. Shamans weren't entertainers or mystics on the fringe. They were healers, spiritual intermediaries, advisors, keeping of history and law. And this matters. Women could and did hold these roles. Female shamans carried authority, lineage, and responsibility. Their position was not symbolic, it was functional and respected. The woman in this study wasn't unusual, she was important. By the 17th and 18th century, the Russian Empire expanded into Yakutia. This wasn't peaceful integration. It involved forced taxation, suppression of indigenous governance, imposition of Orthodox Christianity, active persecution of shamans. Traditional spiritual leaders were labeled dangerous, illegal, or heretical. Within a few generations, belief systems that had existed for centuries were nearly erased. That's why this woman is described as one of the last shamans, not because her culture was dying naturally, but because it was being dismantled. Centuries later, scientists examined naturally preserved remains from this region. Through burial artifacts, clothing, and genetic analysis, they identified this woman as a shaman living in the late 1700s. At the exact moment, Yakut spiritual traditions were collapsing under colonial pressure. This should have been the focus of the story, until it wasn't. Instead, much of the coverage fixated on the genetic detail that her parents were related. Small and isolated communities, especially in extreme climate, often intermarried. Geography limit choice, survival shapes social structure. This pattern appears across human history on every continent. To single it out here without explanation isn't neutral, it's irresponsible. I was reminded of this conversation that I had with my friend, who happens to be a Muslim. We were talking about marriage, where one man with one woman, and I must admit, I was rigid in my thinking. He asked me, what happens after war? History answers that clearly. During periods like the Roman Empire, where wars wiped out men on a massive scale, entire societies were left with more than women than men. Religious texts didn't ignore that reality. The Old Testament acknowledged multiple wives. The Quran reflects allowances shaped by historical conditions. The New Testament emphasizes one man and one woman, not by declaring polygamy sinful, but by pointing towards an ideal that endures when conditions allow. Scriptures adapted reality without abandoning morality, so did cultures. When journalism removes this context, it creates space for ugly conclusions. It allows people to say, well, they were savages. Colonization was good for them. Or the infamous, this proves that they were inferior. None of that is history. It's modern bias wearing ancient clothing. And if that's where someone lands, it doesn't indict the Yakut. It exposes the lens being used to examine this discovery. This story isn't about shock, it's about education. A woman, a spiritual leader, a culture pushed to the brink, and how easily truth gets distorted when history is treated as optional. If we're going to talk about the past, we owe it context. Anything less isn't journalism. Journalism can't just present facts, it has to examine them. DNA is not just moral verdict. Archaeology is not an excuse for dehumanization. The job isn't to provoke disgust. It's to build understanding. And I say all that to say this. I hate this kind of journalism work. I really do. Not out of anger, but out of responsibility or the lack thereof. It's lazy, yes. It's misleading, yes. But most of all, it's dangerous. It takes a life, a culture, a story, and it slices into pieces that fit a headline. It strips away context, strips away history, and it leaves only shock to feed the doom scrolling warriors of our time. Facts without understanding become weapons, complex human lives become caricatures. Truth is flattened, morality is lost, context is not optional, it is the story. Without it, ignorance spreads like fire, and history is written by those too impatient to listen. In 2026, journalism cannot afford laziness. It must illuminate. It must hold nuance. It must honor the lives it touches. Because when we fail to do that, we fail not just our audience, we fail humanity itself. We have to do better. That coverage of the archaeological finding was lazy, misleading, and utterly irresponsible. And that's the story. Let me reveal something shocking during my research for this episode. I'm extremely baffled and concerned by the totality of this ongoing issue. So, I implore you to please consider the following. A 2001 survey claimed that 77.1% of Canadians claim to have a Christian faith. That was 25 years ago. A decade later, in 2011, that number dropped to 67.3%, a 9.8 decline. And in 2021, only 53.3% of Canadians identify as Christians. Imagine that. Nearly half a lifetime if we've lost almost half of that shared belief in our society. Retrospectively, these statistics reveal a moral reckoning of epic proportion in what we are experiencing as a society. I hate to say it, but the world is in a deep sunken place, and we live in very troubling times where nothing is short of seabeds of opposition working hand in hand with the devil. The devil has demon and disciple as much as God has angels and apostles. So let me ask you, which side did you find yourself on this morning? There is this warfare between good and evil brewing, and it is a dangerous cocktail waiting to go up in flames. More now than ever, it is important for us to stay vigilant. There is also unspeakable atrocities, deplorable acts of violence, conflicts with innocent casualties, the very true form and nature of moral depravity, and a primal example of humans overstepping. There is a quote, I don't remember the exact words, but it's timeless, from a man named Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He was a writer, a thinker, someone who lived through tremendous human suffering and understood the depth of human depravity. He witnessed firsthand how ordinary people can be pushed into extraordinary evil, and how morality can fracture when society tolerance for wrongdoing is surpassed. The essence of what he said goes like this. The world has a certain tolerance level for evil. There will always be evil in this world, but when that level is surpassed, all morality cracks and human beings become capable of anything. Think about that. That's not just a theory. That's a primal example of humans overstepping, a warning that spans time and culture. It's the kind of insight that cuts through the noise, forcing us to confront the moral reality of the world we live in today. And I say all that to say this. We're in a state of time. Neither heaven nor the earth knows what the is going on. Excuse my French, but that's just where we're at. What I really want is to address the elephant in the room. I hate the premise that whenever we want to have a rational conversation, people just default to ignorance and irrationality. I mean, it's a pretty bad omen if you ask me. We live in a time where unethical behavior is praised, rewarded, and woven into the very fabric of society. It's not just sick, but vile to the greatest degree. To give you more context, consider the current state of OnlyFans. As of 2025 to 2026, has grown into a global content subscription platform with roughly 305 to 377 million registered users and 4.1 to 4.6 million active content creators. Users are overwhelmingly male, about 78 to 80%, while female users are 20 to 22%. The largest age segments are 18 to 24 at 29.6% and 25 to 34 at 31.3%, meaning more than 6 in 10 subscribers are under 35. Flip the camera to the creators, 84% female, 14% male. Creators are mostly young adults in their late 20s. I think everyone can agree and acknowledge that OnlyFans is essentially work by another name. A safer, more viable way to monetize adult content. Now, I'm not here to knock on anyone's hustle because growing up is a series of uncomfortable collision. Hyperinflation, rising costs, economic uncertainty. The tides are shifting and people do what they have to do to survive. But that doesn't erase the fact that we're facing a moral and ethical crossroad. That said, I don't want to paint everyone with the same brush. Not all content creators do this because they want to. Some are pushed by circumstances, separation, divorce, kids, responsibility, bills, survival. I can sympathize, even empathize for those who don't have the means to care for themselves and their families. That doesn't make their choice easy or right, but it does make them human. We can critique the system, call out the moral tension, and still recognize the pressure that pushed people to the fringes. But if we want to judge fairly, if we want to see who is sincere and who is straddling the line, we first need to understand the difference between morals and ethics. So let me give you guys that framework. Morals is when someone knows to not cheat on their spouse or know that they should not steal, all well knowing they still can do it anyway. That's why a serial cheater continues to cheat because they have no shame. They can't acknowledge what they did was wrong. Ethics is when a person knows to not cheat on their spouse or know that they should not steal, and they simply do not do it. This is why when some people who would do something bad to someone, every time when this person crosses path, they would quickly cross the street to avoid them due to the shame that they felt. That shame and humility is a good indication that you have ethics. You know what you did wrong and you feel extremely bad about it. Now, everyone can have a moral compass because the first talking point was pretty self explanatory, and we all get that. But where we all fall short is we lack the ethics to uphold those morals. So, not everyone gets that. In the same breath, ethics should be the non negotiable gold standard in how we should live and conduct ourselves in full service to each other and to our society. There's a difference between being receptive and being responsible. There's a spectrum here. People are receptive, but they are usually passive about it, whereas there are people who are receptive, but who are responsible people. So it's important to be the voice of our own reasoning. A deceived person, by the very nature of deception, has no possible way of knowing that they are being deceived. That is, unless someone shines a light onto the issue, revealing the truth to them and exposing the lies for what they truly are, lies and deception. Yet there are stories of faith intersecting with this modern world. Take Nala Ray, a person who quit the platform, embraced Christianity, also share her transformation online. Another influencer who goes by the name Black China, her real name, Angela White, left the platform, removed cosmetic enhancement, embraced faith after baptism, and completely changed her life. Sophie Rain, still producing content but identify as Christian. And then there's Lily Phillips, stepping back, reconnecting with faith, but her action tells a different story. Two things can coexist at once. You can claim faith and still act contrary to it. You can step away entirely, or you can straddle the line thinking intention is enough. It's tough to be a female in today's society. Social media continues to bombard them with vanity, allure, and the constant message that is the only path to buy you into a good life. That in itself is a travesty and a dangerous narrative, yet standard practice in advertising, marketing, and a culture we inhabit. The phrase sells is more than just a slogan, it's a philosophy shaping behavior, ambition, and choices, quietly coursing the young and impressionable. But intention without alignment is empty, faith without action is hollow, and this is where Lily Phillips come in. Last year, she was arrested in Indonesia, later released. She speaks with defying confidence in an interview. Did you think I was going to do jail time? Now, before going there, she expressed concern, consulted with her lawyer, fully aware of the fact and legal consequences. She planned every detail, weighed every risk, made every move with strategy, calculation, anticipation, and intention. Every move is measured with precision. But let's be clear, her actions don't align with the faith she claims. She is straddling the line, playing a game between God and compromise, which makes me deeply skeptical of her supposed spiritual reconnection. I fear it spreads the wrong message to the young girls. I get why people make these choices, economic pressure, survival, whatever the reason, but I don't support it. Work is not something I endorse, and weaponizing God to justify it, that's dangerous. That's misleading. That's morally corrosive. I like Sophie Rain because at least Sophie Rain is plump and honest about where she stands, even if I disagree with her choices. Sophie's not hiding behind spirituality while continuing the work. That's why many say she's a lukewarm Christian, claiming faith yet choosing to stay in a lifestyle that contradicts traditional teachings. But make no mistake, Lily Phillips is no Nala Ray, she's no Black China. Lily represents the danger of faith claim but untested, morality spoken but unpracticed, intentions celebrated while actions contradict them. Her story is a mirror for our time, showing what happens when human desire meets temptation, when words masquerade as conviction, when the line between ethics and survival blur. And that is the truth I want to leave you with. Faith is measured in action, not claims. The past is behind you, the windshield is your choices, your alignment with principle, your courage to stand when the world whispers compromise. Do not let intentions alone define your life. Do not let claim faith substitute for integrity. If there is one takeaway from this moment, one prism through which to view all moral ambiguity, is this: watch actions, not words. Measure the heart by what it produces, and never mistake intentions for righteousness. That is the reality. That is the battlefield. That is where humans overstep and where faith, when willed correctly, becomes the only weapon that matters. This week shows us how fast the world moves, from tragedy at Crans-Montana bar fire, to Greenland strategic ice and land grabbing debates, to Ontario threatened to ban Crown Royal and the cross-province road trip it might spark, to federal ice shooting spark protests across the nation, to an Emirati teen breaking barriers to top the world, the viral debates over morals at Winnipeg Beach, to Canada facing a mental health and workplace crisis, to Trump's de minimis and China crackdown tension, to the dangers of journalism stripping context, and finally, to OnlyFans, faith, and the moral crossroad of a generation. These aren't just headlines, they are reminders that every action, every choice, every decision echoes farther than we think. Stay informed, stay critical, stay compassionate, and remember, the world isn't slowing down, and neither are we. That's it for this week. Until next time. That's what the happened this week. Over and out.
Take me back to my hometown. Take me back.